The skies were an ominous shade of gray as the sun barely peeked through the thick clouds over the battlefield. On one side, the Indian army stood resolutely, their uniforms crisp and their faces steeled. On the other side, American soldiers braced themselves for the coming storm, the stars and stripes fluttering boldly in the wind. The tension was palpable. This was no ordinary confrontation, both nations had dispatched their best, and it showed. The air buzzed with the silent hum of high-tech drones scouting the land, feeding real-time data to commanders on both fronts. Tactical screens illuminated the control rooms, where military leaders plotted their moves with surgical precision. The Indian commanders planned a pincer movement, intending to encircle the American forces. They were unaware that the Americans had already anticipated this, setting traps and ambush points in the dense forest that separated the two armies. The first clash came at dawn. Indian infantry units charged through the wooded terrain, only to find themselves under a hailstorm of gunfire. American snipers had taken positions in the trees, their shots precise and deadly. Indian soldiers took cover behind rocks and trees, returning fire as the battle intensified. Suddenly, a squadron of American helicopters soared overhead, their rotors slicing through the air. Missiles screamed toward the Indian command post. The missiles were intercepted by anti-aircraft fire just in time. The sky lit up with explosions, and shrapnel rained down on both sides. Amidst this chaos, Captain Rajesh of the Indian Army led a daring counteroffensive. Rallying his troops, he pushed forward, breaking through the American lines and capturing vital ground. His bravery inspired those around him, turning the tide of the battle in favor of the Indian forces. However, the Americans were not so easily defeated. Major Williams orchestrated a flanking maneuver, closing in from the sides and catching the Indian troops off guard. The two armies clashed in hand-to-hand combat. Bayonets and knives reflected the day's last light. Each soldier fought not just for victory, but for the comrades standing beside them. The emotional toll was evident as the battlefield echoed with the cries of the fallen, but neither side would relent. In a final gambit, the Americans deployed their most advanced technology. Drones armed with EMPs targeted Indian communication lines, leaving Captain Rajesh and his men momentarily disoriented. Sensing the opportunity, Major Williams launched a full-scale assault, pushing the Indians back to their last line of defense. The climax of the battle saw both leaders face off, exchanging gunfire and strategies in a relentless struggle. With dwindling ammunition and growing fatigue, the fight became less about territory and more about sheer survival. The images showed close-ups of soldiers' faces, grim yet determined, conveying the raw emotion of the conflict. As the sun set, casting the battlefield in a blood-red hue, the sounds of war began to fade. Both armies, battered and bruised, retreated to regroup and tend to their wounded. The battle had no clear victor, but it left an indelible mark on all who fought. The final shots featured the battlefield strewn with equipment, smoke rising in the distance, and the haunting silence that followed a day of carnage. In the end, the story wasn't just about India versus America, but about the bravery, strategy, and indomitable spirit of the soldiers who fought with everything they had. The narrative closed with a somber reflection on the costs of war.